Have you ever felt that subtle whisper of doubt? When everyone else in your group seemed absolutely certain, that internal nudge to maybe question something, but then a powerful, almost invisible force just held you back.
And what if that silence you felt? What if it wasn't really genuine loyalty, but something, well, far more insidious, a kind of conditioning, maybe so deeply embedded you didn't even recognize it was happening?
Today, we're taking a really vital deep dive into the profound insights of Michael Aponte's influential work, Join the Club or Burn the Heretic. It's a key part of his broader Obedient Nation series. Now, Aponte, he founded the Resilience Charter School, hosts the Thinking to Think podcast. He really challenges us all to scrutinize the mental shortcuts we instinctively take, often without realizing the profound impact on our autonomy.
It's an incredibly powerful and frankly necessary invitation in our current world, isn't it? Our mission for this deep dive is exactly that. To equip you, our listener, with the analytical tools, the self-awareness needed to recognize these pervasive pressures, and, crucially, to safeguard your independent thought against them. We're going to meticulously explore how that deeply human, almost primal need to belong can dangerously intersect with powerful group dynamics, leading individuals, often without even conscious intent, to surrender their critical autonomy, to silence their own conscience.
And here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable for some. This isn't just about the fringe groups or those stereotypical images of cults, isolated compounds, people in robes, charismatic leaders making wild proclamations. The psychological mechanisms, the dynamics Aponte meticulously highlights. They're not confined to those extreme margins.
No, they're not.
They are thriving, often invisibly, in environments as diverse as, say, corporate boardrooms, fervent political rallies, even seemingly benign school classrooms.
Right.
And certainly they are supercharged and amplified within our digital spaces.
Right.
So to set your expectations clearly, this deep dive is about understanding that dangerous, often unseen intersection, identity, obedience, and our inherent need for psychological safety, especially in an increasingly polarized, kind of tribalized world. It's about unpacking cult psychology, not as some weird anomaly, but as a pervasive force that manifests all around us. So to truly unpack this, we really need to begin by shedding some common misconceptions, things that often cloud our understanding. When the word cult comes up, many of us immediately conjure those vivid, almost sensational images, right? Isolated compounds, strange rituals, individuals in, unusual attire. But Michael Aponte, drawing extensively on the foundational works in cult psychology, makes a critical point here. Understanding these origins, these academic frameworks, it's not just for historical context. It is absolutely crucial for navigating our modern environments, precisely because these dynamics are no longer confined to those narrow, easily dismissed stereotypes.
That's such a vital reframe, isn't it? It completely shifts our perception from them, those other people in those groups to potentially us.
Right.
It forces us to acknowledge that the underlying dynamics are far more pervasive, more insidious, and frankly, maybe more relatable than we might ever have imagined. It's not about the robes, really. It's about the psychological levers being pulled.
Absolutely. Aponte grounds his analysis in the pioneering work of psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton. His landmark book, Thought Reform and the Psychology of Totalism, from 1989, meticulously outlines 8 key characteristics of these kinds of cultic environments. Lifton's framework gives us this almost X-ray vision, allowing us to see the subtle, often imperceptible ways groups can exert profound control over individuals. Let's take milieu control first. Now, This isn't just about physical isolation, like a group living on some remote farm.
Right.
It's about how information is meticulously restricted and managed, controlling what members see, what they hear, what they read. Think for a moment. Not of a compound, but maybe a carefully curated social media feed, or perhaps a news channel you exclusively follow. One which only presents a singular, unwavering viewpoint, effectively cutting you off from dissenting or alternative perspectives. It's like a mental and informational quarantine.
So it's not a literal wall, but it's like an invisible informational barrier they build around you. They're not just controlling your physical space, they're actively shaping your mental landscape, your whole perception of reality. That's honestly far more unsettling than offense.
Precisely. Then there's the demand for purity. This characteristic insists on an absolute black and white worldview. No gray allowed. Everything within the group's ideology is deemed pristine, virtuous, correct. While anything outside or any deviation from it is immediately branded as impure, evil, or just fundamentally wrong. There's simply no room for shades of gray, for complexity, or for the nuanced realities of human experience.
It simplifies everything, I suppose. Makes choices seem easy, but dangerously so.
Exactly. Following this, Lifton identifies confession. This is the intense, often public pressure
Yeah.
to confess perceived transgressions, whether they're real or imagined. Now, this isn't about genuine remorse or seeking forgiveness. It's a powerful mechanism for reinforcing group norms, shaming individuals back into line, and inducing a profound sense of guilt to ensure conformity. Public confession effectively reestablishes the group's dominance over the individual's inner world.
Oof. The public nature of that must be incredibly humiliating and therefore incredibly effective at reinforcing the group's power over the individual. It makes the very thought of future dissent even more terrifying because you know the potential social costs. You're not just admitting a mistake, you're basically reaffirming the group's absolute moral authority over you.
It's exactly right. Next, Lifton identifies what he calls sacred science. This is the unwavering belief that the group's doctrine, its ideology, its core tenets, whether they're religious, political, social, are absolutely, divinely, or scientifically true and righteous. Beyond any questioning or empirical challenge, it becomes an infallible truth that just supersedes all other knowledge, reason, or external evidence.
So facts don't matter if they contradict the sacred science.
Pretty much. And to further reinforce this internally constructed world, there's loading the language. This involves the creation of a specialized vocabulary, a jargon, maybe even catchphrases that only insiders fully understand. It acts as a powerful identifier, reinforces group identity, makes outsiders feel excluded and bewildered, and it creates an almost impenetrable barrier to communication with anyone not fluent in the group's specific lexicon. You can't even talk to outsiders effectively anymore.
So it's not just an echo chamber of ideas, but an echo chamber built into the very words they use. Wow, you can't even articulate a dissenting thought sometimes without using the group's language, which kind of already primes you towards their perspective. And finally, and maybe the most chillingly, dispensing of existence. What is that?
Yes, this is profoundly dehumanizing. It's the insidious idea that those outside the group, or maybe those who dare to leave, are unworthy, or simply don't truly exist in any meaningful, moral, or even human sense. They become non-persons, mere shadows, which of course justifies their dismissal, their condemnation, or even their outright dehumanization. It's a psychological tactic to emotionally and morally disconnect from anyone who isn't part of us, making it much easier to disregard their well-being or their perspective. Building on Lifton's meticulous work, Aponte also frequently references Stephen Hassan's BITE model, which provides an even more, let's say, practical and accessible breakdown of the methods used for psychological compliance in these cultic environments. BITE is an acronym: behavior, information, thought, and emotional control. Let's delve into behavior control. This mechanism involves regulating members' actions, their daily routines, even their associations. Think not just of physical confinement, but maybe more subtle directives: prescribed diets, specific dress codes, mandatory participation in group activities, or even rules about who you can or cannot associate with outside the group. It dictates the very fabric of your daily life, ensuring you're constantly immersed in the group's world.
So it's about controlling every little piece of your life, yeah? Making sure your entire existence revolves around the group's demands, leaving very little room for independent action or well-thought.
Precisely. Then there's information control. This involves the deliberate withholding or distortion of information, often through sophisticated censorship or relentless propaganda. This is closely related to Lifton's milieu control, but Hassan emphasizes the active manipulation of facts, twisting narratives or sometimes outright lying to maintain the group's version of reality.
Okay, so actively feeding you misinformation, not just limiting information.
Correct. Next, thought control. This is the deliberate indoctrination of specific belief systems, actively and aggressively discouraging any form of critical thinking, questioning, or skepticism. The group provides all the answers, presents an infallible doctrine. Independent inquiry isn't just seen as dangerous, it's often branded as disloyal, selfish, or even a sign of some moral failing.
And finally, emotional control, which I find honestly arguably the most insidious because it's so deeply personal, isn't it? This is about manipulating emotions like intense fear, profound guilt, overwhelming shame, or even sometimes intoxicating euphoria to maintain unwavering compliance. They make you feel incredibly good, validated, safe when you conform, aligning your emotional state with the group's narrative. But they make you feel terrible, isolated, morally bankrupt when you don't. It's a constant carrot and stick, just wielded directly at your inner world.
What's truly fascinating here, and what Aponte really excels at highlighting, is how these robust academic frameworks, initially designed to analyze seemingly fringe groups, high-control organizations, offer such incredibly clear and powerful lenses through which to view everyday interactions and dynamics in our modern world. Aponte drives this home with a truly critical and provocative insight. Cults don't always wear robes, sometimes they wear hashtags.
Mhm.
He argues compellingly that the defining characteristic of a cult-like environment is not what a group believes, but profoundly how it handles dissent.
And that, for me, is such a crucial distinction. It completely shifts our focus from the content of the belief, which can often distract us, right, to the process of belief, the dynamics of adherence. It's not what they preach, but how they preach, and more importantly, how they react when you question the sermon.
Exactly. When the very definition of loyalty becomes this unwavering emotional allegiance to a leader, an ideology, or a group identity, rather than, say, a reasoned, evidence-based agreement on ideas. And when any flicker of doubt, any nuanced question is immediately equated with betrayal or an attack on the group's very foundation, that's precisely when a group begins its dangerous transformation. It stops being a dynamic space where truth is genuinely sought, ideas are debated, or individuals can grow intellectually. Instead, it becomes a rigid, often tyrannical mechanism of control. It's about maintaining a specific narrative, a singular truth at all costs, even if it means stifling independent thought and individual conscience.
So the outward appearance becomes almost irrelevant in a way. It's the internal dynamic, that profound, aggressive intolerance of questioning that is the true signifier, the flashing red light. It's a powerful, almost unsettling idea to consider as we look at the various groups, communities, movements we inhabit today. Makes you look twice at things you might have just taken for granted. This profound shift in understanding brings us to a fundamental, deeply personal question. If these dynamics are so controlling, potentially so suffocating, why do people join in the first place? And once they're deeply immersed, once those invisible walls start closing in, why do they stay silent? Even when those quiet whispers of doubt inevitably begin to creep into their minds. Aponte, drawing on a wealth of psychological research, points directly to that powerful, almost irresistible fundamental human need for connection, for belonging, a need that cults and cult-like groups are absolute masters at exploiting.
It's the seductive allure of belonging, isn't it? The initial draw is rarely, if ever, malicious on the part of the joiner. It's about finding a place where you feel genuinely understood, seen, accepted, maybe for the very first time, finding your intellectual or emotional home.
Precisely. Let's really lean into that feeling for a moment. Think about that almost visceral relief of finding your tribe, whether it's a new friend group, a political movement that finally articulates your frustrations, a spiritual community that offers a clear path, or even a professional network that seems to just get you. That immediate sense of shared understanding, the comfort, the profound safety that comes from being part of something. A clear identity, a compelling sense of purpose. It feels incredibly good, doesn't it? It fills a deep, aching void that maybe many of us carry. That's what makes the initial pull so incredibly strong, so overwhelmingly positive. You feel truly seen, deeply valued, and finally, part of something immensely bigger and more meaningful than just yourself.
And once you've experienced that profound sense of belonging, once you've invested your very identity into it, the idea of losing it, of being cast out, becomes utterly terrifying. The psychological cost is immense.
Exactly. That's where we flip the coin, where the light shifts to shadow. After the intoxicating allure of belonging comes the crushing existential fear of rejection, of complete social exile. Imagine for a moment investing not just your identity, your time, your emotional energy, but your future into a group that is giving you all those powerful, positive feelings. Then the mere idea of expressing even a slight disagreement, a nuanced viewpoint, or asking a genuinely curious question can trigger an almost unbearable wave of guilt, a profound sense of betrayal, or the terrifying prospect of being completely cast out, publicly shamed, and left utterly alone. Maybe, just maybe, it's not steadfast faith or conviction keeping us quiet. It's pure, unadulterated fear. The paralyzing fear of losing that comfort, that hard-won identity, that safety net you've meticulously built. The terror of suddenly being alone and adrift again in a world that might feel hostile without your group.
This intense emotional pressure cooker, this deep-seated fear of social ostracization, leads us directly to a concept many will recognize from social psychology. Irving Janis's seminal work on groupthink. Janis coined this term to describe a distinct psychological phenomenon where the desire for harmony, for cohesion, for unanimity within a group overrides a realistic appraisal of alternative courses of action. In these environments, individuals consciously or unconsciously suppress their own doubts. They actively ignore contradictory evidence or alternatives. They deliberately silence their critical thinking, all simply to maintain a perceived consensus to keep the boat from rocking.
So it's not even about genuinely agreeing with the collective decision. It's about avoiding conflict, avoiding being the outlier at virtually any cost, even at the cost of sound judgment, ethical consideration, or what you deep down know to be true. It's kind of a profound self-betrayal just for the sake of peace.
That's right. And Giannis made it explicitly clear that this phenomenon is not limited to traditional fringe cults. It permeates seemingly mundane, everyday groups. Think about the dynamics within corporate decision-making teams where maybe no one dares challenge a powerful CEO, even if the strategy seems flawed.
Right.
Or the echo chambers of political parties, activist communities, or even, as our source material mentions, seemingly benign school boards, where a vocal minority can dominate discourse and dissenters are quickly marginalized. Once a group's moral framework, its core ideology, becomes so deeply entrenched and implicitly accepted, questioning it isn't merely disagreeing with a policy, it immediately becomes heresy. It morphs into a moral failing in the eyes of the group, which then carries all the crushing emotional weight of betrayal, disloyalty, and, profound character flaw.
And who in their right mind wants to be labeled a heretic? Nobody. The social cost is simply too high for most people to bear.
This isn't accidental. It's profoundly rooted in our evolutionary programming. Humans are fundamentally social creatures. Our survival throughout hundreds of thousands of years often depended entirely on being part of a cohesive group, on conforming, on not being cast out into the wilderness alone. To be exiled was often a death sentence. So while our sophisticated prefrontal cortex might process information and arrive at a different, more rational conclusion, our deeper, more ancient brainstem often screams with almost primal urgency, "Don't rock the boat. Stay safe. Stay connected." It's a powerful, almost irresistible urge. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains why even highly intelligent, critically thinking individuals can fall prey to these dynamics. It's not a deficiency of intellect. It's a deeply ingrained social and psychological vulnerability that can bypass conscious reasoning. The human brain is, at its core, a social organ, and its primary concern is often social survival and cohesion, sometimes even over objective truth or individual integrity.
It's a powerful, almost inescapable primal pull that these groups exploit with, well, shocking efficiency. And when you truly grasp that, it starts to become unsettlingly clear how these dynamics aren't just residing in the fringes or hidden away in remote compounds anymore. They are, quite literally, everywhere we look, in almost every facet of our networked lives.
Indeed. It's absolutely crucial to understand that these insidious cultic dynamics aren't just theoretical constructs confined to dusty academic papers or fascinating historical case studies. Aponte compellingly argues that today, cult dynamics are alarmingly prevalent and identifiable in virtually every political corner of our discourse and in countless other societal groups. We see them manifesting in stark, undeniable ways in our modern public squares, both physical and digital.
It's not an accident. It's a direct consequence of these mechanisms we've been talking about. Once you start consciously applying the Lifton and Hassan frameworks, the parallels to everyday behavior just jump out at you with, frankly, unsettling clarity. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses.
Exactly. Take the sphere of politics, for instance. We observe, almost universally across the spectrum, the clear and often unquestioning idolization of leaders. These figures transcend mere politicians. They become almost messianic, figures beyond reproach, their words taken as absolute gospel, their flaws excused, minimized, or outright denied. Coupled with this idolization is the rampant, often aggressive demonization of the other side. This isn't simply political disagreement anymore. It's the systematic painting of the opposition as fundamentally evil, hopelessly misguided, or an existential threat to everything good and decent. This creates a stark, tribal us versus them mentality, making any form of bridge-building, nuanced discussion, or bipartisan compromise almost impossible. This is a direct manifestation of Lifton's demand for purity writ large, where one side is pure and the other inherently corrupt.
And then, that insidious demand for purity tests, for ideological adherence. It's no longer enough to simply vote a certain way or align with a party, is it? You're often expected to believe exactly the right things, articulate them in the exact right way, using the approved lexicon, and fervently denounce the exact right enemies. Any deviation, any nuance in your stance instantly makes you suspect a potential heretic in the making. This is classic loading the language and demand for purity applied directly to political identity.
That's a perfect segue into the world of activism. Within many activist communities, there's a powerful, almost gravitational pull towards complete conformity. We frequently observe the harsh shaming of those who dare to ask clarifying questions, express nuanced viewpoints, or suggest alternative strategies that might deviate from the established party line. Nuance, instead of being embraced as maybe a sign of critical thinking, intellectual honesty, or strategic foresight, is often immediately viewed as weakness, equivocation, or even worse, as a direct betrayal of the cause, a sign of insufficient commitment.
It's an intellectual and emotional binary choice, isn't it? With absolutely no room for thoughtful disagreement or genuine internal debate. You either parrot the approved narrative or you're branded an enemy, often very publicly. This dynamic is incredibly suffocating. And ironically, it fundamentally shuts down the very critical thinking and complex problem solving required to achieve real, lasting progress. This is Hassan's thought control and emotional control in action, where the fear of being seen as disloyal just trumps genuine inquiry.
And where do these dynamics get turbocharged, reaching unprecedented levels of reach and impact? On social media. Algorithms on these platforms are meticulously designed, often inadvertently, to reinforce our existing ideological bubbles, creating pervasive and incredibly effective echo chambers. They relentlessly show us more of what we already agree with, creating the illusion that our specific viewpoint is the universally accepted, indeed maybe the only valid one. These platforms actively reward purity, that unquestioning, zealous adherence to group norms and shared beliefs, through likes, shares, retweets, algorithmic visibility. Conversely, they ruthlessly punish nuance, any deviation, any critical thought, any expression of doubt, often through reduced reach, a deluge of negative comments, public shaming, or outright cancellation.
So, the platform itself becomes not just a conduit for communication, but a powerful engine for groupthink. It actually gamifies conformity. And that's precisely why we see phenomena like cancel culture and extreme political tribalism becoming so incredibly prevalent and potent. They don't always reflect coordinated manipulation from a single source, but they absolutely reflect the same foundational psychological mechanisms that make cults so devastatingly effective. Emotional control, aggressive identity reinforcement, and rigid moral absolutism. The tools might be different. Hashtags instead of sermons, comment sections instead of confessionals, but the psychological levers, the core vulnerabilities they exploit are exactly the same.
Today's cults don't need isolated compounds or remote farms. They have comment sections, carefully curated feeds, and tightly controlled online communities. It's like an open-air prison, a constant, pervasive reinforcement of the in-group's narrative and a brutal public shaming of the out-group.
And to expand on that, I'd say hashtags are kind of the new sacred texts. They encapsulate incredibly complex ideas, nuanced historical context, deep philosophical debates into these simple declarative statements that quickly become non-negotiable truths, unassailable dogma enforced by the collective. There's no room for deeper inquiry. The hashtag is the truth.
This powerful observation aligns perfectly with the arguments put forth by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt in his seminal work, The Righteous Mind. Haidt posits a truly counterintuitive and profound argument. We as humans don't primarily form our beliefs based on pure, dispassionate reason or empirical evidence. Rather, he argues, we form tribes first and reason follows. This is a profound reversal of how many of us consciously perceive our own decision-making processes. People tend to instinctively believe what their group believes and then justify it afterward. Their sophisticated reasoning, their intellectual prowess becomes a kind of post hoc rationalization for an already adopted group identity and the beliefs that come with it.
So it's not that you meticulously think, then you intellectually believe, then you decide to join a group that aligns with those beliefs. Instead, Haidt suggests you join a group, often for emotional or social reasons, then you adopt its beliefs, and then you find elaborate ways to intellectually justify those beliefs to yourself and others. That's a truly chilling thought about the deep-seated biases within human nature, isn't it?
It truly is. And the profound implication here is that the self is no longer separate from the group. It is defined by it. Your individual identity, your sense of self, becomes intricately and often inextricably intertwined with the group's identity, its values, its enemies, its triumphs. This raises an incredibly important and deeply personal question for you, our listener, to ponder. How much of what you believe, how much of who you are, how much of your moral framework is genuinely your own independently arrived at thought? And how much is a reflection, an echo of the groups you belong to and identify with? When your very sense of self becomes so deeply intertwined with a group, the pressure to conform, the terrifying fear of questioning becomes almost overwhelmingly powerful. It's a profound psychological bind. This deep immersion into group identity and the subtle, pervasive mechanisms of control brings us to what Michael Aponte identifies as a truly new and frankly disturbing frontier of control, a core contribution of his work. He argues, it is no longer enough to be politically aligned. You must be morally pure. This goes far beyond simply sharing the same policy positions, voting records, or even intellectual agreement on a particular issue.
So it's not just about what you do or say you believe anymore. It's about how you're expected to feel about it and who you're supposed to stand against with the right kind of righteous indignation. That's a whole new level of control.
Exactly. This, at its core, is what Aponte calls moral conformity. The relentless pressure not only to agree intellectually with the group's official stance, but to feel the right way about it, to express the right tone, to exhibit the right emotional reaction, and crucially, to publicly denounce the right enemies with the appropriate level of outrage. It's a demand for absolute emotional and ethical alignment, not just behavioral or intellectual.
Think about that profound implication for a moment. It's not just about what you say you believe, but how you're expected to feel about it internally, and who you're supposed to performatively stand against with a specific prescribed level of righteous indignation. If you don't feel the precise amount of anger or express the proper level of outrage or sadness or even enthusiasm, you're not just seen as disagreeing. You're perceived as not being morally pure enough, not virtuous enough, not caring enough. It's an incredibly invasive and suffocating form of psychological gatekeeping.
And because of this potent moral framing, any form of dissent is fundamentally transformed. In this emerging model, dissent isn't merely disagreement with an idea or a policy. It's immediately perceived as an indictment of your character. If you dare to question the group's moral stance, its sacred cows, or its chosen villains, it's not because you might have a different perspective, access to new information, or simply a nuanced thought. No. It's because there's something inherently, fundamentally wrong with you. Your integrity, your compassion, your virtue, your very moral standing all are immediately called into question. You are branded a morally compromised individual.
It's a devastating tactic, really. It weaponizes morality against independent thought and intellectual honesty. And if your character, your very soul, is being attacked, that's a much, much harder thing to defend against than a simple intellectual disagreement. You can debate facts, but how do you debate someone accusing you of lacking virtue? It's designed to just shut you down.
Aponte posits that these sophisticated cult-like systems emerge in movements, communities, online spaces, not primarily because of ideology, but because of emotional gatekeeping. This is a crucial paradigm-shifting distinction. It's less about a charismatic leader dictating strange dogmas, and far more about a pervasive, unspoken pressure to control the emotional landscape of the entire group.
So if it's not ideology driving it primarily, what does that emotional gatekeeping really look like in practice? How do they enforce it without, explicit rules?
It's incredibly subtle, yet powerfully effective. It means that you are constantly being told, often through subtle cues, group reactions, implied expectations, exactly what to care about, how intensely to care, and even what your silence means in a given situation. If you're not expressing the expected level of outrage over a perceived injustice, or a specific degree of sadness over an event, or a precise measure of support for a particular issue, your silence isn't interpreted as thoughtfulness or nuance. Instead, it's immediately interpreted as a profound lack of virtue, a sign that you don't care enough, or worse, that you're implicitly endorsing the wrong side, the enemy. Obedience in this intensely pressurized context is no longer requested or debated. It is unequivocally expected as tangible, public proof of your virtue, of your moral alignment. It becomes a performative display of inner alignment.
So you literally have to perform your virtue. Wow. Even if you harbor internal doubts, even if your conscience whispers a different truth, you are compelled to outwardly show the world, and more importantly, the group, that you are perfectly aligned, not just intellectually, but emotionally and morally. That's a profound and deeply unhealthy shift from simple compliance to a performative display of inner alignment where your true self is just suppressed.
What's truly fascinating here is how incredibly insidious this form of control is. It's not just about what you do or even what you say, but what you feel and how you express that feeling. It probes deeply into the very core of your internal world, your emotional landscape, and demands conformity even there. It creates an internal dissonance that can be incredibly damaging over time.
And the relentless pressure to perform that virtue, to contort your genuine emotions and thoughts to fit the group's expectations, can be utterly suffocating. It forces you into a constant state of self-censorship, a perpetual internal editor that distorts your true thoughts and feelings. That kind of constant self-editing, that vigilant policing of your own inner world, is truly exhausting. And over time, it can profoundly erode your very sense of self, leaving you wondering if you even know what you truly think or feel anymore, independent of the group's narrative. It's a subtle but profound loss of self. This brings us to a particularly challenging and perhaps profoundly uncomfortable part of our deep dive: the immense, often soul-crushing personal cost of independent thought. Michael Aponte is unflinching in his assessment here, stating with stark clarity that leaving a cult is not just an act of intellectual rejection, it is a form of social suicide.
That's an incredibly powerful and evocative statement, and it really speaks to the depth of the identity loss and the profound isolation involved. It's not just about changing your mind about some ideas, it's about potentially rebuilding your entire social world from scratch.
It truly does, because when you make the courageous decision to leave a high-control group, individuals don't merely lose a belief system or a set of dogmas or an ideology. They often lose their entire support system, their closest relationships, their social circle, sometimes their job, and a significant, often central part of their identity. Everything they've built their life around, everyone they've known intimately, might literally disappear overnight. That, for many, is an unimaginable sacrifice, a terrifying leap into the unknown. And even in these more subtle, non-traditional cults like tightly knit digital communities or intense, all-consuming political affiliations, the cost, while not always physical, is still deeply, profoundly emotional and social. You might suddenly lose thousands of followers, long-standing friends, colleagues, and perhaps most painfully, that precious moral safety and validation of group consensus.
The digital realm might not involve physical isolation in a compound, sure, but the social isolation, the public shaming, the digital ostracization, it can be just as devastating. Maybe even more so, given its public nature and permanence sometimes. The feeling of being canceled can feel like a kind of social death.
Absolutely. You might find yourself abruptly on the outside, castigated and ostracized by the very people you once considered your closest tribe, your chosen family. The overwhelming fear of that profound loss is often what keeps people quiet, even when their internal alarm bells are screaming, even when their conscience is begging them to speak out. So in this context, after everything we've explored today, I have to ask you, our listener, to really sit with this question. Are you, in some part of your life, part of a group, be it social, political, professional, or spiritual, that you are genuinely afraid to question? Is there a quiet corner of your mind where doubt whispers, where a different truth nudges, but the fear of social exile, of being branded a heretic, keeps you profoundly silent? It's a very personal, very uncomfortable question to honestly grapple with, and it requires some radical self-reflection.
It demands an almost brutal introspection, doesn't it? A raw and uncompromising honesty with oneself about the true cost of belonging in certain contexts.
But here's the crucial pivot. The profound, almost incomparable gain that comes from finding that rare courage to question, to speak, to maybe even walk away. Yes, there's an immense cost, a painful shedding, but you gain something else that is far more valuable, far more enduring. You reclaim your mind, you reclaim your true voice, you reclaim your fundamental ability to think, to question, to explore, and to express yourself without that gnawing, paralyzing fear of exile, condemnation, or public shaming. You reclaim your autonomy, your intellectual and emotional sovereignty. You reconnect with your authentic self, independent of external validation or group-imposed narratives. It's not just a gain, it's the ultimate liberation, the very essence of self-determination.
It truly is. And that leads us directly to the overarching, critical message we want you to take away from this deeply impactful deep dive. We all, every single one of us, possess a fundamental, ingrained human desire to belong. It's wired into our very DNA, a deep-seated survival mechanism that has guided us for millennia. But we must develop the acute awareness and the moral courage to recognize when the price of that belonging, when that price demands self-abandonment, the suppression of our conscience, or the silencing of our independent thought is simply too high. It is never worth sacrificing your intellectual integrity, your moral compass, or your genuine self for a fleeting sense of belonging.
And Aponte reminds us with remarkable compassion and clear-eyed wisdom that cults, in all their forms, don't thrive because people are stupid, unintelligent, or easily manipulated. They thrive, heartbreakingly, because people are profoundly lonely. They are deeply afraid of uncertainty and isolation. And they are desperately searching for certainty, for a clear path, for a sense of purpose in an increasingly complex and chaotic world. These groups offer a simple answer, an unambiguous truth, and a seemingly welcoming, tight-knit community when everything else feels overwhelming and devoid of meaning. It's a powerful seduction for a vulnerable human need.
So to actively resist cultic thinking in any form, whether it manifests as a traditional high-control group or as an insidious digital echo chamber, we must fundamentally shift our cultural norms. We must actively normalize doubt, making it an acceptable and even celebrated part of intellectual inquiry. We must consciously reward nuance in our discussions and interactions, valuing complexity over simplistic binaries. And perhaps most importantly, we must restore profound dignity and honor to those incredibly brave, humble, and often challenging words, "I'm not sure." It is precisely in that uncertainty, in that courageous willingness to explore, to question, to admit the limits of our knowledge, that true wisdom genuinely lies.
It takes immense courage to say, I'm not sure, when everyone else around you seems so vehemently certain, so absolutely convinced, doesn't it? It takes courage to step outside the prescribed emotional responses, to feel what you genuinely feel, not what you're expected to perform.
Indeed. True belonging, the kind that nurtures and uplifts, doesn't demand silence or conformity. It doesn't require you to abandon yourself. On the contrary, it requires courage, the profound courage to think for yourself, to question, to explore, and to stand firm in your own intellectual and moral integrity. Even when it means standing alone, if only for a moment, to find your true footing.
This is obedient nation.
And if thinking for yourself gets you exiled,
Yeah.
you might just be in the right place.